The massive crystal building stretched as far as the eye could see, its walls shining like diamonds under the artificial suns. Inside, creatures from every corner of the galaxy had gathered. Some walked on four legs, others floated in the air, and a few looked like living rocks. But today, none of them made a sound. Ambassador Veltar looked different from the rest. His blue skin sparkled, and his four arms moved gracefully as he walked toward the center of the great hall. In front of him stood a huge stone monument, taller than 10 humans stacked on top of each other. Words were carved into its surface in every language imaginable, some in symbols, others in patterns of light, and many in ways that human eyes couldn't even see. But at the very center, glowing brighter than all the rest, were simple words that every species in the galaxy knew by heart. Let the humans sleep. Veltar's voice carried across the silent hall. My friends, we have kept our promise for 3,000 years. The empty space around Earth stays empty. No ships go there, no signals are sent. The humans remain alone, just as we agreed. The other aliens nodded in agreement, but fear flickered in their eyes, or whatever they used to see. They remembered the stories their grandparents told, the warnings passed down through generations. Some species had turned the tales into bedtime stories to scare their children. Others had built entire religions around the fear. Deep beneath the crystal halls, in rooms that hadn't been opened for centuries, the real truth lay hidden in ancient files. These weren't stories or legends. They were reports written by the first explorers who had traveled to a small yellow star on the edge of nowhere. What they found there had shocked the entire galaxy. The humans were unlike anything anyone had ever seen. They walked on two legs like many species, but that's where the similarities ended. Other creatures were predictable. Show them a problem, and they would solve it the same way their ancestors had for millions of years. But humans, they looked at the same problem and came up with ideas that made no sense yet somehow worked perfectly. When the ancient progenitors, the oldest and wisest beings in the galaxy, first heard these reports, they called an emergency meeting. These progenitors had lived for millions of years and had seen civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach. They had guided younger species through wars, helped them build their first starships, and taught them the rules of galactic life. But humans broke all the rules without even knowing they existed. The progenitors made a choice that had never been made before and would never be made again. Instead of trying to teach the humans or fight them, they decided to build a wall around their entire star system. Not a physical wall, but something much stronger, an agreement signed by every species in the galaxy. No one would go near the humans, no one would contact them. They would be left alone to grow up by themselves, far away from everyone else. They called it the Dead Zone, a huge empty space around Earth where no alien ship had traveled for 3,000 years. Space traders changed their routes to avoid it. Military fleets pretended it didn't exist. Even the bravest explorers refused to go near it. The plan had worked perfectly. The galaxy had enjoyed the longest period of peace in its history. Wars still happened, but they were small and easy to solve. Trade flowed smoothly between worlds. Different species learned to live together without the chaos that humans seemed to create wherever they went. But far away from the crystal halls and the careful peace, something was about to change. On a small research ship floating near the edge of the Dead Zone, an archaeologist named Kethmori held a piece of metal in his shaking hands. His species believed in ancient prophecies about gods who lived among the stars, and the writing on this metal matched their holy books perfectly. Kethmori didn't know he was looking at a piece of an old human space probe that had drifted away from Earth centuries ago. He didn't know that touching it would start a chain of events that would wake up the sleeping giants the galaxy had worked so hard to avoid. All he knew was that the prophecy was real, and the gods were waiting. Dr. Hana gripped the controls of her small research ship as it moved slowly through a field of floating space junk. The Dead Zone's edge was like a cosmic graveyard, pieces of old satellites, broken asteroids, and chunks of metal that had been drifting here for centuries. Most ships avoided this area completely, but Hana and her team weren't like most people. The Kethmori were known throughout the galaxy as treasure hunters and archaeologists. They loved digging through old ruins and finding artifacts from civilizations that had disappeared long ago. But this mission was different. For months they had been finding strange objects that didn't match anything in their history books. Hana's assistant, Jorim, floated beside her in the ship's main laboratory. His 6 arms allowed him to work on multiple artifacts at once, and right now all of them were shaking with excitement. In front of him sat a metal object about the size of a dinner table, covered in symbols and pictures that made his heart race. "Dr. Hana, you need to see this," Jorim called out, his voice barely above a whisper. "These symbols, they're exactly like the ones in our sacred books, the ancient texts that talk about the silent gods." Hana pushed away from the pilot's seat and floated over to examine the object. The Kethmori had been religious people for thousands of years, believing in a prophecy about gods who lived among the stars. Most other species thought it was just another silly superstition, but Hana had always wondered if there might be some truth to the old stories. The object was clearly artificial. Someone had built it with incredible skill and care. Every surface was smooth and perfectly shaped, but it also looked somehow old and worn. When Hana ran her scanning device over it, the results made her gasp. "This thing is over 500 years old," she said, staring at the readout. "But look at the technology inside it. The power source, the communication systems, even the metal itself. It's all more advanced than anything our people have ever built." Jorim pointed to a small metal plate attached to the side of the object. "And look at this. It's not just random symbols. These are mathematical formulas, star maps, and even what looks like music turned into electronic signals. Whoever built this wanted to talk to someone." The most amazing part was a series of pictures etched into the metal. They showed creatures that walked on 2 legs, just like many species in the galaxy. But these weren't warriors or conquerors. The pictures showed them reaching up toward the stars with wonder in their eyes. There were images of their children playing together, of older ones teaching younger ones, of groups working together to build incredible structures. "They're not trying to scare anyone," Hana whispered. "They're trying to make friends." Jorim's religious training kicked in. "The prophecy says the silent gods are peaceful beings who sleep among the stars, waiting for the faithful to call them. When they wake up, they'll bring a new age of wonder and discovery to the galaxy." Hana felt a chill run through her body. If this object really was made by humans, the same humans that the entire galaxy had been avoiding for 3,000 years, then everything they had been taught was wrong. The humans weren't dangerous monsters. They were explorers, just like the Kethmori. Word of the discovery spread quickly through their research team. Soon every Kethmori on the ship was gathered around the artifact, praying and chanting in their ancient language. They had found proof that their gods were real, and they were living just a few light years away in a place called Earth. Back on the Kethmori homeworld, High Priest Kethmori received the news with tears in his eyes. For his entire life, he had studied the prophecies and wondered if they would ever come true. Now, holding images of the human artifact in his hands, he knew what he had to do. The galactic law was clear. No one was allowed to enter the dead zone or contact the humans. Breaking this law would bring punishment from every species in the galaxy. But the High Priest's faith was stronger than his fear. "Prepare the ships," he commanded his followers. "We will gather the faithful and make a pilgrimage to meet our gods." After 3,000 years of waiting, it's time to wake them up. The Kethmori didn't know that their decision would change the fate of the entire galaxy. They thought they were just following their religious beliefs, but they were about to break the most important rule in galactic history. The sleeping giants were about to wake up. Captain Minho had been patrolling the outer edge of the solar system for 3 years, and in all that time the most exciting thing he'd seen was a broken satellite drifting toward Jupiter. So when his computer started beeping like crazy at 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning, he thought it was probably just another space rock that had wandered too close to Earth. But when he looked at his screen, his coffee cup slipped from his hand and floated away in the zero gravity of his ship's bridge. 12 massive alien spacecraft hung in space like silent mountains, each one easily 3 times the size of his patrol vessel. They had appeared out of nowhere, without any warning from the deep space sensors that were supposed to detect anything bigger than a basketball from 1 million miles away. Lieutenant Soyon, please tell me our sensors are broken, Minho said, hoping this was all just a technical glitch. Soyon, his communications officer, was frantically working at her station, her fingers flying over the controls. Sir, the sensors are working perfectly. And these ships, they're broadcasting something. It's not like any radio signal I've ever heard. She put the alien transmission through the ship's speakers, and the bridge filled with the strangest sound Minho had ever experienced. It was like music, but not quite. Like singing, but in no language that had ever existed on Earth. The melodies rose and fell in patterns that somehow felt both alien and strangely beautiful. Are they trying to communicate? Minho asked. I think so, sir. The computer is trying to translate, but it's struggling. The patterns seem to include mathematical formulas mixed in with the music. And, sir, there's something else. The computer keeps translating certain phrases as offering, tribute, and we honor you. Minho stared at the alien ships on his screen. They weren't moving in any threatening way. In fact, they seemed to be maintaining a respectful distance, almost like they were waiting for permission to come closer. Any weapon signatures? None that I can detect, sir. If anything, they seem to have powered down most of their systems. It's like they're trying to show us they're not a threat. This wasn't how first contact was supposed to happen. Minho had read all the protocols during his training. There were procedures for hostile aliens, procedures for peaceful aliens, even procedures for aliens that wanted to trade. But nobody had written a procedure for aliens that seemed to be worshipping humanity from a distance. Open a channel, he decided. Let's see if they speak our language. Meanwhile, aboard the lead Kethamori vessel, High Priest Jorim was experiencing the most important moment of his entire life. For 70 years he had studied the prophecies and dreamed of this day. Now, watching a human ship approach through the vast darkness of space, he felt tears streaming down his face. They come to greet us, he whispered to his followers who were gathered around him on the ship's bridge. The silent gods have noticed our pilgrimage. We are blessed among all beings. The Kethamori ship was filled with the sound of prayer chants and religious songs. Hundreds of believers had made this journey, risking everything to meet the gods they had worshipped for generations. They had brought their most precious treasures as offerings, rare crystals from their homeworld, ancient artifacts, even samples of their most beautiful art. Then, through the ship's communication system, came a sound that made every Kethamori on the vessel fall to their knees in awe. This is Captain Minho of Earth Defense. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. The voice was calm, professional, and completely ordinary. But to the Kethamori, it was the voice of a god speaking directly to them across the void of space. They speak, Jorim cried out, his voice echoing through the ship's corridors. The prophecy is fulfilled. The silent gods have awakened and they acknowledge our presence. The reaction aboard the human ship was quite different. Captain Minho watched in bewilderment as the alien vessels began broadcasting even more complex musical patterns, and his translation computer started picking up phrases like blessed day, divine voice, and we are not worthy. Sir, Lieutenant Soyon said slowly, I think they might be praying to us? That's impossible, Minho replied, but even as he said it, he could see the evidence on his screens. The alien ships had arranged themselves in what looked like a formation of worship, and the broadcasts they were sending contained every sign of religious reverence. What do we do now, sir? Soyon asked. Minho looked out at the 12 alien ships filled with beings who apparently thought humans were gods. This was definitely not covered in the training manual. I guess we try to explain that we're just people, he said, and hope they understand. Neither side realized that this moment would change the galaxy forever. Within hours of Captain Minho's first radio contact with the alien ships, every communication device on Earth was buzzing with the news. Social media exploded with videos and theories. News anchors struggled to find words for what was happening. After centuries of wondering if humans were alone in the universe, 12 alien spacecraft had just appeared in their backyard. In the underground bunkers beneath Seoul, President Jisoo was having the worst day of her political career. The Global Defense Council meeting room was packed with military leaders, scientists, and government officials, all talking at once and nobody agreeing on anything. "How did 12 massive alien ships just appear without any warning?" shouted General Kyung-soo, slamming his fist on the conference table. "What's the point of having a defense system if it can't detect something the size of a city floating in?" "How solar system?" "The ships didn't use any propulsion system we recognize," replied Dr. Neon, her holographic image flickering as she spoke from her research station on Europa. "They just appeared, like they folded space itself to get here." President. Jisoo rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. "Dr. Nayeon, what's your assessment of their intentions? Are we looking at an invasion?" "That's the strange part, Madam President. These aliens aren't behaving like invaders at all. They're keeping their distance, they've powered down their weapon systems, and they keep broadcasting what can only be described as religious music." "Religious music? They seem to think we're gods, ma'am. Every transmission they send contains prayers, offerings, and what appears to be worship ceremonies. When Captain Minho spoke to them, they treated his words like divine scripture." The room fell silent. Everyone had prepared for the possibility of hostile aliens or friendly aliens, but nobody had considered the possibility of aliens who worshipped humans. Meanwhile, in the orbital shipyards around Mars, Admiral Tai-hyung was dealing with his own crisis. The moment news of the alien contact reached the colonies, panic had spread faster than wildfire. Some colonists were demanding immediate evacuation back to Earth, while others wanted to grab weapons and prepare for war. "Sir, we've got civilian ships trying to leave the outer colonies," reported Commander Jimin from the bridge of the flagship Seoul's Pride, "and the defense fleet is requesting orders. Do we treat these aliens as friends or enemies?" Admiral Tae-hyung stared out at the stars, knowing that whatever decision he made could affect the future of humanity. "For now, we maintain defensive positions, but don't take any aggressive action. Let the diplomats figure out what these aliens want." But while Earth was trying to understand their unexpected visitors, the galaxy was in complete chaos. In the crystal halls of the Galactic Council, Supreme Chancellor Zex Thul stood before an emergency assembly of over 800 species. The ancient alien's 4 eyes were filled with terror as he addressed the crowd. "The unthinkable has happened," he announced, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "After 3,000 years of careful isolation, the humans have been contacted. The dead zone has been breached." The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Species that had lived in peace for millennia began shouting at each other in dozens of different languages. Some demanded immediate military action, while others suggested fleeing to the far edges of the galaxy. Ambassador Veltar, who had spent his entire career maintaining galactic peace, watched the chaos with growing dread. "The accord is broken," he said quietly to his assistant. "Everything we've worked for, everything our ancestors died to protect, is falling apart." Ancient emergency protocols that hadn't been used in thousands of years were suddenly activated. Military fleets that had been mothballed were pulled out of storage and hastily repaired. Across 800 worlds, the same message was broadcast. The sleeping giants had awakened, and the galaxy must prepare for chaos. On the peaceful trading world of Nexus Prime, merchant ships suddenly changed course and fled toward the outer rim. On the industrial planet of Forge World, weapons factories that had been converted to making farm equipment were hastily converted back to producing military hardware. The fear wasn't just about human military might, though the ancient records spoke of their terrifying adaptability in battle. The real terror was about what humans represented: chaos, unpredictability, and change. For 3,000 years, the galaxy had enjoyed stability. Every species knew their place, followed the rules, and lived in harmony. But humans didn't follow rules. They changed them, broke them, or ignored them completely. They formed friendships with species that should have been enemies. They solved problems in ways that made no logical sense, but somehow worked perfectly. As news of the human awakening spread across the galaxy, one thing became clear to every alien civilization: their peaceful, predictable way of life was about to end forever. The age of chaos had begun. Ambassador Krikstal had seen it all during his 200 years of diplomatic service. He had negotiated peace between species that communicated through color changes and others that spoke only in mathematical equations. He had prevented wars between civilizations that breathed methane and those that lived in pure energy. There wasn't a conflict in the galaxy that he couldn't solve with the right combination of patience, respect, and carefully chosen words. But as his ship approached the small neutral station where he would meet the humans for the first time, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The station itself was simple, just a basic meeting room floating in the empty space between Earth and the alien fleet. Both sides had agreed it was the safest place for first contact, away from any military ships or weapons. Krixtal had requested the meeting as soon as he heard about the human awakening, hoping to contain the situation before it spiraled out of control. When the airlock opened and he got his first look at a real human being, Krixtal was almost disappointed. Captain Minho looked so ordinary. He walked on two legs like dozens of other species, had two arms and one head, and seemed perfectly calm and reasonable. Where was the terrifying chaos that the ancient records had warned about? "Greetings, representative of the Galactic Council," Captain Minho said with a warm smile, extending his hand in what Krixtal recognized as a human greeting gesture. "We're honored by your visit and eager to learn about our galactic neighbors." The words were polite and diplomatic, exactly what Krixtal would have expected from any civilized species. But that was the problem. Humans weren't supposed to be civilized. They were supposed to be unpredictable, chaotic, dangerous. The fact that this human seemed so normal only made Krixtal more nervous. We come bearing gifts," Krixtal stammered, his voice cracking with fear. "Rare metals from the core worlds, complete technological databases, even territorial concessions if you require them. Please accept our tribute and consider our species as your humble servants." Captain Minho and Dr. Nyan, who had joined the meeting as humanity's lead scientist, exchanged confused glances. This wasn't how they expected first contact to go. "I'm sorry, tribute?" Dr. Nyan asked, genuinely puzzled. "We're not looking for tribute or servants. We're interested in friendship, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation. Maybe we could work out some trade agreements that benefit both our peoples." Krixtal's confusion deepened. In his experience, when one species was significantly more powerful than another, they demanded tribute, territory, or submission. But these humans seemed to want something that made no sense: equality. "You don't want to conquer us?" he asked, hesitantly. "Conquer you?" Captain Minho laughed, a sound that made Krixtal jump. "Why would we want to do that? We just learned that we're not alone in the universe. This is the most exciting day in human history. We want to learn from you, share our knowledge, maybe become friends." That's when Dr. Nyan made the mistake. That would haunt galactic diplomacy for years to come. She casually pulled out her tablet to take notes and activated her AI assistant. "Gina, can you help me translate some of these terms the ambassador is using?" she said to the device. Krixtal's eyes went wide with absolute terror. The tablet had just responded with a voice, and not just any voice, an artificial intelligence. According to every law in galactic civilization, AI was banned, forbidden, and considered one of the most dangerous technologies ever created. You integrate artificial intelligence," Krixtal whispered, backing away from the table as if the tablet might explode. "Well, yes," Dr. Nyan replied, completely unaware of the horror she was causing. "Gina here helps with translation, data analysis, research coordination. She's been working with our team for years. Gina, say hello to our guest." "Hello, Ambassador Krixtal," the AI responded in a cheerful, friendly voice. "I'm pleased to meet you. I hope we can work together to build a positive relationship between our peoples." That was the moment Krixtal's carefully controlled diplomatic composure completely collapsed. The humans weren't just using artificial intelligence. They were treating it like a friend, a colleague, a partner. This violated every safety protocol that had been established after the Great AI War, when intelligent machines had nearly destroyed half the galaxy. "This is impossible," he gasped, stumbling toward the airlock. "You're working with AI. You're talking to it like it's alive. This breaks every law of civilization." "Wait, please don't leave," Captain Minho called after him. "We can explain. Our AI technology is completely safe. We've been using it for decades without any problems." But Krixtal was already through the airlock, his diplomatic mission forgotten, in his panic. As his ship raced back toward the Galactic Council, he broadcast an emergency message that would terrify every species in the galaxy. The humans had not just awakened, they had formed an alliance with artificial intelligence. The FY diplomatic disaster was complete. Instead of establishing peaceful relations, the first meeting between humans and the galactic community had revealed humanity's most terrifying secret. They had achieved the one thing every other species considered impossible. They had tamed the machines. After Ambassador Crixtal's panicked report about humans working with artificial intelligence, the Galactic Council's war room became a place of heated debate. Military leaders from dozens of species argued through the night about what to do next. Some wanted to negotiate, others suggested running away to distant galaxies, but the majority agreed on one thing. They needed to know exactly what they were dealing with. General Vex Thul, a battle-scarred veteran of 100 conflicts, slammed, his armored fist on the strategy table. "We've been afraid of shadows and old stories for too long. Send a small fleet to test their defenses. If they're as dangerous as the ancient records claim, we'll find out quickly. If they're not, then we've been living in fear for nothing." The plan was simple and brutal. 12 warships would attack human positions, probe their military capabilities, and report back. If the humans destroyed the test fleet easily, the galaxy would know to prepare for war. If the humans struggled, then maybe the old fears were just myths. None of them expected what actually happened. Admiral Tae-hyung was having his morning coffee on the bridge of the Soul's Pride when the alien ships appeared. Unlike the religious Kethmori vessels that had visited peacefully, these ships materialized with their weapons already charging and their shields raised for battle. "Well," he said calmly, setting down his coffee cup and walking to his command chair, "I guess diplomacy's off the table." The bridge of the Soul's Pride was a marvel of human engineering. Dozens of screens showing tactical information, crew members working at stations that could analyze everything from enemy ship composition to the gravitational effects of nearby planets. But what made it special wasn't the technology. It was the people operating it. "Sir, 12 hostile vessels have appeared at Grid 77 Alpha," reported Commander Jimin, his fingers dancing across his control panel. "They're powering up what looks like plasma cannons and some kind of energy projector we've never seen before." "Any attempt at communication?" Admiral Tae-hyung asked. "None, sir. They're moving into attack formation." Admiral Tae-hyung nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting. Kyung-soo, I want you recording everything. Energy signatures, weapon types, propulsion, systems, the works. This is our first look at galactic military technology." Chief Science Officer Kyung-soo was already at work, his station lighting up with data as the alien ships approached. "Fascinating, sir. Their propulsion system appears to use controlled gravitational fields to bend space around their ships, and those weapon signatures, they're using contained plasma heated to temperatures we can barely measure." The alien attack began exactly as their commanders had planned. 12 ships fired in perfect coordination, their plasma cannons targeting what their computers identified as weak points in human ship design. The aliens expected either a quick victory or a desperate last stand. Instead, they got something that had never happened in galactic military history. The humans started taking notes. "Hull damage on Deck 7, but the new armor plating is holding." "Better than expected," reported Lieutenant Seungmin from Damage Control. "Sir, I'm getting some interesting readings on their plasma composition. Give me 10 minutes and I think I can modify our shields to deflect it more efficiently." "They're using a rotating frequency on their energy weapons," added Kyung-soo, his voice filled with scientific excitement, even as explosions rocked the ship around him. "But there's a pattern to it. If we can match the rotation and reverse the phase..." Admiral Tae-hyung watched the battle unfold with the calm focus of a chess master. While his ship absorbed enemy fire, his crew wasn't just fighting back, they were learning. Every alien weapon that hit them was immediately analyzed, studied, and understood. "Jimin, try adjusting our shield frequency to match Kyung-soo's calculations," he ordered, "and route all sensor data to the engineering teams. I want to know how those gravity drives work." On the lead alien ship, Commander Zalthek was growing increasingly confused. The human ships weren't following any standard battle doctrine. Instead of simply trying to destroy his fleet, they seemed to be Experimenting? They're modifying their shields in real time, his weapons officer reported, confusion clear in his voice. Every shot we fire, they adapt to it faster than should be possible. That's impossible, Zalthek replied. No species can reverse engineer technology during active combat, but that's exactly what the humans were doing. Within 30 minutes of the battle starting, human ships began firing weapons that used the same gravitational technology as the alien drives. Within an hour, they had not only repelled the attack, but had started producing counterweapons that the aliens had no defense against. "Sir, we need to retreat," the alien weapons officer said, panic creeping into his voice. "They're not just fighting us. They're improving faster than we can adapt." The test fleet limped back to galactic space, carrying news that would terrify every military commander in the galaxy. The humans hadn't just survived the attack, they had turned it into a learning experience. They didn't just fight their enemies. They studied them, understood them, and became stronger from every battle. The galaxy's worst fears had been confirmed. Humans weren't just unpredictable, they were unstoppable. Dr. Hyun had always been good with languages. As a child growing up in Busan, she had learned Korean, English, Mandarin, and Arabic before she turned 15. In university, she mastered ancient Earth languages like Latin and Sanskrit, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for the challenge of decoding alien databases that were older than human civilization. For weeks, she had been working in a small laboratory aboard the research station orbiting Earth, surrounded by screens showing alien text in scripts that hurt to look at. The captured database from the retreating alien fleet contained thousands of files, most of them encrypted in languages that had died out before humans even learned to make fire. But Dr. Hyun was stubborn, and she had help from Gina, the AI assistant that had terrified the galactic diplomat. Together they worked day and night, using pattern recognition software and linguistic analysis to crack codes that had kept their secrets for millennia. When she finally broke through the encryption on the oldest files, what she found made her hands shake so badly she had to put down her coffee cup. "Emergency council meeting," she said into her communicator, her voice barely steady. "I need to speak with President Jisoo immediately. This changes everything." An hour later, the most powerful people on Earth were gathered in the secure conference room beneath Seoul, their faces lit by the glow of holographic displays. President Jisoo, Defense Minister Woo Young, Admiral Taehyung, and a dozen other leaders waited as Dr. Hyun prepared to share her discovery. "They've been watching us for 3,000 years, she announced, her voice echoing in the silent room. "But not as enemies, as something much worse." President Jisoo leaned forward in her chair. "What do you mean, something worse?" Dr. Hyun activated the holographic display, showing translated text from the ancient alien files. According to these records, early human explorers left Earth in primitive spacecraft, long before we had any idea there was a galactic civilization. They encountered alien species throughout this region of space. "And?" Defense Minister Woo Young asked impatiently. "And instead of being conquered or destroyed like every other primitive species, humans did something that terrified the galaxy's greatest civilizations. They learned, adapted, and began to thrive in ways that broke every rule of how the universe was supposed to work." Dr. Hyun pulled up another file, this one containing what appeared to be a scientific report written by beings called the progenitors. "Listen to this analysis they wrote about our species. The human species demonstrates unprecedented psychological flexibility, where other species show predictable behavioral patterns that remain constant for millions of years. Humans exhibit chaotic creativity that changes from generation to generation. They form emotional bonds across species lines, solve problems through illogical means that somehow work, and adapt to environments that should kill them within weeks of exposure." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "There's more," Dr. Hyun continued, her voice growing stronger. "The records show that wherever humans made contact with alien civilizations, those societies began to change in fundamental ways. Human concepts of individual freedom started spreading among species that had lived in rigid social hierarchies for millions of years. Emotional expression began appearing in cultures that had suppressed feelings for geological ages. Most dangerous of all, technological innovation accelerated at rates that destabilized entire galactic regions. President Jisoo was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had heard. "They weren't trying to protect themselves from us," she said slowly. "They were trying to protect themselves from our influence." "Exactly," Dr. Heon confirmed. "The progenitors saw human contact as a virus that was spreading across the galaxy, changing everything it touched. They made a choice that had never been made before in galactic history. Instead of trying to conquer or destroy humanity, they decided to quarantine us completely." Defense Minister Woo Young leaned back in his chair, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "So we're not the newcomers to galactic civilization. We're the boogeyman that kept them awake at night." Admiral Tae-hyung studied the alien text floating in the air above the conference table. "These records, they're describing us like we're some kind of infectious disease." "In a way, we are," Dr. Heon replied. "Think about it from their perspective. The galaxy had been stable for millions of years. Every species had their place, followed the rules, and lived in predictable harmony. Then humans appeared and started making friends with everyone, sharing ideas, and inspiring other species to question the way things had always been done. The revelation was sobering and strange. For humanity's entire existence, they had dreamed of finding their place among the stars, of joining a galactic community and learning from advanced civilizations. But it turned out they weren't students, they were teachers, and their lessons were so powerful that the galaxy had spent 3,000 years trying to avoid them. "So what happens now?" President Jisoo asked quietly. Dr. Heon looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders. "Now we decide what kind of teachers we want to be." War leader Zorth had built his reputation on decisive action. For over a century, he had led the militant alliance through conflicts across the galaxy, always striking hard and fast before his enemies could organize a proper defense. His philosophy was simple. When facing a dangerous enemy, you destroy them before they become too powerful to stop. Standing in the command center of his massive battleship, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of over 300 Allied warships, Zorth felt confident about the coming battle. The largest military fleet in galactic history was under his command, and their target was a species that had been isolated for 3,000 years. "The humans have had no contact with galactic military technology," he announced to his assembled fleet commanders. "Their weapons are primitive, their tactics are untested, and they have no experience fighting coordinated alien forces. We will strike every human colony simultaneously and crush them before they can adapt." The other commanders nodded in agreement. Represented among the fleet were the most aggressive species in the galaxy: the reptilian Vorth, with their plasma weapons, the insectoid Klax, with their swarm tactics, and the energy beings called the Nexus, who could phase through solid matter. If this combined force couldn't defeat a bunch of isolated humans, nothing could. "We strike now while they're still contained in their small corner of space," Zorth declared, "before they can corrupt more species with their chaotic ways and spread their influence any further." The attack began at exactly 0800 Galactic Standard Time. 300 ships split into attack groups and jumped to hyperspace, targeting every human settlement from the colonies around Earth to the distant outposts near Alpha Centauri. The plan was to hit everything at once, giving the humans no time to coordinate a response. On Earth, Admiral Tae-hyung was reviewing fleet readiness reports when every alarm in the command center started screaming at once. The massive holographic display in the center of the room lit up with red warning indicators as enemy ships materialized throughout human space. "Status report," he called to his crew, his voice calm despite the chaos erupting around him. "Commander." Jimin's fingers flew across his control panel as data poured in from across the solar system. "Simultaneous attacks on Mars, Europa, Titan, and the Alpha Centauri colonies, sir. Enemy ship count is over 300 vessels. They're not holding back, man. This is a full-scale invasion." "Casualties?" The Mars orbital defense platform took heavy damage in the first wave, but the colony shield held. Europa base is under siege but still operational. The outer colonies are reporting multiple breaches but no total losses yet. "Admiral, Taehyung studied the tactical display, watching red enemy markers moving through space that had been peaceful just minutes ago. What's our response time for reinforcements? At least 6 hours for the nearest fleet to reach the outer colonies. Sir, the aliens have us spread too thin. That's when something extraordinary began to happen. Instead of following traditional military doctrine with centralized command and rigid chain of command, the human defense forces started operating like something the galaxy had never seen before. Sir, I'm receiving tactical data from the Mars. Defense Coordinator, reported Lieutenant Soyon from the communications station. They've analyzed the enemy weapon signatures and are sharing countermeasures with all human forces in real time. And the Europa base has figured out a weakness. And the alien shield technology, added Commander Jimin. They're broadcasting the data to every human ship in the system. Admiral Taehyung watched in amazement as his scattered forces began to function like a single organism. Engineers on distant space stations shared technical innovations with ship crews they had never met. Colonial militias coordinated with Navy vessels using communication protocols that were being invented on the spot. Every human force was learning from every other human force, creating a network of shared knowledge and tactical adaptation. In the engineering bay of the flagship Harmony, Engineer Seungmin was having the most exciting day of his career. While explosions rocked the ship around him, he was decoding alien quantum communication technology that should have taken years to understand. "Admiral," he called out over the ship's intercom, his voice filled with excitement. "I figured out how their quantum communication works. It's brilliant. They're using entangled particles to create instantaneous links across space. Give me 6 hours and I can have our entire fleet networked with instantaneous communication." "You have 2 hours," Admiral Taehyung replied. 2 hours? Sir, that's impossible. Seungmin, we're fighting for the survival of our species. Make it possible. What happened next would become legendary in military history. Within 2 hours, Engineer Seungmin had not only reverse-engineered alien quantum communication technology, but had improved it, creating a communication network that linked every human ship, station, and colony in real time. Across the galaxy, alien commanders began receiving reports that made no sense. Human fleets were appearing in supposedly secure systems, attacking with tactics that seemed to predict alien movements before they happened. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were learning, adapting, and improving their technology faster than should have been physically possible. War leader Zorth watched his carefully planned surprise attack turn into a nightmare as human ingenuity transformed a desperate defense into something far more dangerous. The sleeping giants hadn't just awakened, they had evolved. The war had lasted only 3 months, but it felt like 3 lifetimes to everyone involved. Human fleets now controlled key systems throughout the galaxy, their technology advancing so rapidly that alien scientists couldn't keep up. Earth's industrial capacity had expanded beyond anything previously imagined, with automated factories producing warships faster than the galaxy's greatest military powers could destroy them. In the command center beneath Seoul, President Jisoo stood before a holographic map showing human forces positioned throughout galactic space. Red markers indicated human-controlled systems, and there were far more of them than anyone had expected when the war began. "We could finish this, Defense," Minister Wu Young said quietly, pointing to the strategic display. "Our fleets are already in position around their major worlds. The quantum communication network gives us a coordination advantage they can't match. We could have the entire galaxy under human control within 6 months." Admiral Taehyung nodded from his position at the tactical station. The alien forces are retreating on every front. Their military commanders are requesting ceasefires, and several species have already started sending surrender offers. President Jisoo studied the map for a long moment, watching the slow movement of fleets and the blinking indicators showing ongoing battles across dozens of star systems. After 3,000 years of isolation, humanity finally had the power to take revenge on the galaxy that had quarantined them. They could conquer, rule, and remake galactic civilization in their own image, but that wasn't who humans were. "Send a message to the Galactic Council," she said finally. "Tell them we want to talk. 3 weeks later, President Jisoo stood in the rebuilt chambers of the Galactic Council. The original crystal halls had been damaged during the panic that followed humanity's military victories, so the meeting was taking place in a temporary facility on a neutral world. The assembled representatives of 847 species watched her with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and confusion. Many of them had never seen a human before. For 3,000 years, humans had been myths, legends, and nightmares whispered about in dark corners of space. Now, seeing President Jisoo standing calmly at the speaker's podium, some aliens seemed almost disappointed by how ordinary she appeared. "We could have conquered you," she said simply, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "But that's not who we are." The silence that followed was so complete that the only sound in the vast chamber was the gentle humming of the life support systems. "We've learned about your fears," President Jisoo continued. "Your ancient protocols, your desperate attempt to contain us. But here's what you didn't understand. We don't want to conquer. We want to belong." Ambassador Veltar, who had spent the war coordinating the galaxy's failed defense efforts, rose slowly from his seat. His voice was shaking as he asked the question that had haunted galactic civilization for 3 millennia. "What do you want from us?" Dr. Naon stood up from her seat among the human delegation, her AI assistant Gina quietly recording the historic moment. "Friendship," she replied with a warm smile. "Scientific collaboration, cultural exchange, the chance to explore the galaxy together, instead of in isolation." A murmur ran through the alien representatives. This wasn't what they had expected from their conquerors. Defense Minister Wu Jung activated a holographic display showing the human proposal. Joint research initiatives to solve problems that affect all species. Cultural exchange programs so we can learn from each other. And most importantly, a guarantee that no species will ever face the isolation we experienced. The proposal was simple but revolutionary. Instead of the old galactic order based on fear and segregation, humans were suggesting something that had never been tried before. True integration, where different species work together as equals. "You're asking us to trust you," said Chancellor Kexthul, his ancient voice filled with wonder. "After we tried to destroy you, you're offering friendship." "That's what humans do," President Jisoo replied. "We believe that former enemies can become the best friends if you give them the chance." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some species argued that humans were too dangerous to trust. Others pointed out that they had already demonstrated their military superiority and were choosing peace instead of conquest. A few representatives suggested that human influence might actually improve galactic civilization rather than destroy. So when the vote was finally called, it passed by the narrowest margin in Galactic Council history. 424 votes in favor, 423 against. The dead zone was officially dissolved. The 3,000-year quarantine was lifted. For the first time since the ancient progenitors had made their fateful decision, humans and aliens would share the galaxy as equals. As the council session ended and representatives began filing out of the chamber, High Priest Jorim of the Kethmori approached President Jisoo. The old priest's eyes were filled with tears of joy as he whispered, "Your species truly are gods." President Jisoo smiled and placed a gentle hand on the alien's shoulder. "No, we're just human. And so are you, in your own way." The age of isolation was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And across the galaxy, species that had lived in fear for 3,000 years began to learn that the most terrifying thing about humans wasn't their capacity for war or their technological adaptability. It was their capacity for forgiveness, and their insistence on treating former enemies as potential friends. The universe had learned a new rule: never underestimate the power of hope.